Welcome to Money Talks with Gerald Mr. Mwandiambira, a show that is there for us to have those day-to-day money conversations we sometimes ignore or simply do not know enough to tackle. Today we're talking a conversation which we all know a lot about, and that's money and education. One of the top 4 expenses in your lifetime can easily be that of educating a child. Private education from birth can easily surpass 1 million rand, and this brings to the fore many questions. To help us unpack these questions, we have Terence, a financial planner and investment advisor at Rich Ideas, and Nomusa Nkosi, a mum and an aspirant financial planning candidate. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll start with you, Terence. Why is education so expensive?
The cost of running a school, hiring quality teachers, and we want our kids taught by highly qualified individuals to make sure that we set them up as best as possible for their future careers so that they can then in turn do the same for their kids.
Now, Nomusa, you're a parent. How does education then make you feel? The fact that, Terence is alluding to the fact that it's expensive and you're going to have to do it. What emotions does that bring out in you, and what are the challenges when you think about educating your child?
It actually scares me, Gerald, because I was telling Terence before we go on set, that I was calculating that if you save 100 rands, for example, a month, it doesn't add up to what a private school costs. Private school per month, for example, like St. Andrews, costs 23,000 rands per month. If I'm earning like 6,000 rand, where am I going to get that money from? And obviously, I want the best for my child.
Now, this brings the question, Terence, should everyone be talking private school? Nomusa has just gone straight into there, talking about St. Andrews, the Saints.
Yeah.
It doesn't come cheap. Does education have levels? Does education discriminate? How do you determine which kind of education you can afford?
Joe, I think that's the first one, is what you can afford. We all want to give the best to our children. And for me, when I meet clients and speak to them, it's got to be something that's affordable and within your budget. Interesting stats when we had the matric results that came out in December, January this year. The top 10 most expensive schools in South Africa were not in the top 10 best performing schools in South Africa. And funny enough, the 10 best performing were the old Model C or public-based schooling, and some of them even had free tuition costs. So, we need to balance that up. We want the best, but we need to make sure we're getting value on that spend.
Now, let's discuss education inflation, since you're the financial planning expert. What's education inflation? Is it lower than normal inflation, or is it actually more expensive?
To touch on, so inflation is the cost, the increase in costs, the increase in goods year on year. Education inflation is above that, on average 3 to 5% above general inflation. Now, as of January, that was at 4%, so education inflation is probably somewhere between 7 and 10 per year. So we need to make sure that when we start an investment plan or a savings plan, that we at least match, and if better, outperform the cost of education inflation.
But therein lies the problem, Terence. You're talking 7% education inflation. These schools, they increase their fees by 10%, whether it's inflation or deflation or seaflation. What's going on?
They do that. And like we said, they've got operating expenses, but they're managed by human beings. A lot of them are parents themselves. So having conversations with the school that you want to enlist your children at, discussing with them your budget, and trying to find a middle road on what they charge and what you can afford.
Okay, now before we get into the heavy stuff, let me get some information out of you. Nomusa, are you private educated or public?
I am private, would say Model C, basically.
And how did it go?
With Model C schools, it was great. I don't want to lie to you. I had private from grade 1 until grade 5, and then from there onwards, I went to the Model C schools.
And
the difference between the two is huge in terms of the facilities that you get at school. For example, I'll make an example. Someone from a public school, they don't have computer facilities. The person only sees a computer when they're in university. And it becomes hard for them to use a PC for typing, for assignments, etc., etc. So that is what I'm saying. Sometimes as people will say, better public, yes, it's best, but then when it comes to the facilities and the quality of education, it does really differ.
And Terence, your education stream, what's your history?
I had a combination of both, Gerald, a bit of public and a bit of semi-private schooling. And that's definitely shows, like you said, Nomusa, in the facilities available at the school. And it's what they get as grants from government and what they can raise from the parents to provide that for the children. such as technology facilities, which are vital in going forward today and what's needed for education.
So we want our children to prepare for this fourth industrial revolution. So we've kind of already made that conclusion in terms of the public versus private debate. But you are saying facilities matter, but the results are saying that it doesn't matter. So which one would be something we should be looking at? Because if the results don't actually show a huge gap, why the fuss? Why bother?
I would disagree with that. The results, it depends what results, right? When I was looking at the stats from Business Tech, it says people that actually passed the matric to be allowed into varsities. From the private institution, it was 88.7%. And then from the public, it was only 23%.
Okay.
So they could pass, but question is, can you go to university with your results?
Okay, now, speaking of that university, let's rewind right to the beginning. Do you need a financial planner in terms of planning for your child's education, and when should you engage the services of someone like yourself, Terence?
Hands down, I think you definitely need someone. From a planning perspective, helping you set up a bit of a project management facility, and to act as that coach, that voice, the bounce board on the side. There's a lot of DIY options available, but there's more questions that they raise. You've also touched on, Gerald, when is a good time to start? I think that's as soon as the couple starts having the conversation, or as soon as they find out they've got the blessing of children are coming. The earlier you start, the better to benefit from compounded growth. So the sooner we can start, the lower the contribution potentially could be, and the longer your investment horizon is.
Now, Nomusa, you said your greatest concern is around being able to afford education or quality education for your child.
Correct.
Have you started walking that journey, and have you engaged a financial planner? Have you found it easy, or is it hard to find the right person?
It is really hard to find the right person, because I'm thinking, like I said before, let me say by saving 100 rands per day, like per month, how do you increase that 100 rands to make something bigger than that? Because 100 rands per day is like 1,200 rands a year. In 5 years is what, 6,000 rands. So how do I increase that 6,000 rands to become more than that?
And I think Nomusa is touching on something which a lot of people take for granted. Everybody, when you talk financial planning and saving for education, it's 100 rand, 200 rand, 300 rand, and then they go to KFC and they spend 400 rand.
Exactly.
From a financial planning perspective, for a quality education, what is the magic number? Because I think people need to go away from the 100 rand, 200 rand scenario where you want to fund your children through takeaway amounts. What's a realistic amount a person should be saving?
Gerald, that's got to be based, and I do that based on each client individually. But I think possibly a nice rule of thumb is the school that you've got in mind now, what do they currently charge for school fees?
5,000.
And try and match that as close to it as possible.
Huh.
You're building up a significant kitty, a significant pot of funds that can grow now, hopefully at that 7 to 10% rate, and that we can then ensure that when they reach potentially grade 0 or grade 1, wherever that stage is, and you need to start accessing that money, that it's available to be used. Also, depending on what part of education are we investing for and planning for. Is it primary school, high school, or potentially tertiary qualifications? And that opens a whole nother chapter, whether it's going to be free, whether you're going to study locally or internationally.
Okay, so we've already touched on local, international education. Let's touch on the birds and the bees of investing. Which are probably the 3 investment options which you find are most commonly used for preparing for education funding?
Initially starting when it's a small amount, a bank deposit is great. You want to get the plan going, you want to get the consistency going. As soon as we have some money, let's start making use of unit trusts funds. There's a wide spectrum, and it's quite a minefield with almost 1,500 unit trusts available in the country. So having a qualified financial planner guide you is essential, with a mix of exchange traded funds. So these are passive investments, and unit trusts are active investments. So we want to have a bit of a blend to manage costs and try and, again, and I keep using that word try because we don't know what the future will hold, is to make sure we can outperform education inflation.
So you want to beat education inflation. Now, Nomusa, Terence is going on about passive investing. I don't know what that means.
Terms that I don't know.
Active, passive. Nomusa said she doesn't understand.
Exactly.
How would you break it down to her in terms of the viewer who's also watching?
Right, so active investing is done through a fund manager, and they make decisions based on their mandate within the fund to try and grow your investments. A passive investment is often driven by a computer algorithm, and that mirrors different indices and different shares on the markets to then see that they can lower costs because they don't have human intervention, and a blend of those two show that we can get a great return on your money.
Now, Nomusa, I would say you probably would represent South African middle income mum. And in your circles, your network, your friends, your family, why do middle income South Africans feel the pressure to perhaps go for private education? Because, I mean, the cost of private education, you just alluded to, are high. But is there pressure? Are you what's driving the behavior for yourself and perhaps your peers towards private education?
It's the quality of education, Mr. G, right? Because, for example, like I said, when I looked at the stats from Business Tech, it showed something totally alarming. How can a private school, they only count for 5% in our education, but they're giving out results for 88% of the graduates that can go to varsity. Yeah. Every parent wants their kids to go to varsity at the end of the day. You don't want to take your kids through matric and then they just matriculate in nothing, you see. So now, yes, they do pass matric in the public schools, but question is, will they be able to go to our universities or universities of technology? That's what we need. That's what we want as parents.
Okay, so we're hearing it directly from a parent. So far, private education is the way to go simply because the matriculants from private schools simply get into university, and the costs, however, can be a bit of a challenge. We'll be discussing those costs and ways around them and how to get your child the best deal you can get around education. Stay tuned for more after the break.